My daughter-in-law went on vacation and ordered me to take down the tree and look after everyone. When she returned, her key no longer opened the door. There was no, please, no thank you, just orders as cold as a New England winter. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would. And if you, for a second, feel like this sounds familiar, I just ask that you leave a like and subscribe. It will help me keep venting. JFK International Airport was buzzing with the typical agitation of a Friday afternoon, when well-off families escape to exotic destinations while the rest of the world prepares for another routine week. I, Carol Davies, was there not as a traveler, but as the unpaid chauffeur for my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, and my son, Michael, lugging their Louis Vuitton suitcases toward the Delta check-in counter. "Hurry up, Carol! We're running late!" Vanessa snapped at me. Adjusting the Prada sunglasses she'd bought with money I, unbeknownst to her, had wired to Michael's account for family emergencies. Her Louboutin heels tapped against the airport floor with the arrogance of someone who has never walked in cheap shoes, creating a percussive rhythm that seemed to mark my own humiliation. The New York breeze of January slipped through the automatic doors, mixing with the artificial scent of the duty-free shop and the reheated coffee from the terminal kiosks. Vanessa wore a camel-colored cashmere coat that had cost more than 3 months of my pension, while I wore my wool coat from Lord & Taylor, bought on sale 5 years ago, discreetly mended on the right sleeve where it had caught on the subway turnstile. "Mom, we need to talk," Michael said, pulling me aside while Vanessa supervised the baggage, weighing with the meticulousness of a tax auditor. His voice had that impatient tone he'd developed since getting married, as if conversations with me were unwanted corporate distractions on his schedule as an important man. Michael worked as a financial director at an investment firm that managed multi-million-dollar client portfolios, a position he'd secured after I'd quietly refinanced my apartment in Astoria, Queens, to pay for his finance master's at Columbia Business School. He knew this, but he never mentioned it in front of Vanessa, who believed her husband's success was solely the result of his natural brilliance and his lineage from an established East Coast family. "We're going to the Maldives for 15 days, he continued, avoiding my gaze while counting euro bills that I recognized by the particular smell of currency newly withdrawn from the bank. "It's our anniversary and, well, we need time for ourselves. The Maldives. That aquatic paradise where a single night cost what I spent on groceries for 2 entire months. I mentally calculated 15 days multiplied by at least 500 euros daily, just for lodging, not counting the flights, meals, excursions. A fortune that exceeded the annual income of most retired Americans. "That's fine, son," I murmured, adjusting the imitation leather handbag I'd bought at a local flea market stall in Astoria, acutely aware of how it contrasted with the authentic accessories that surrounded Vanessa like an armor of social status. Vanessa then approached, extending a set of keys toward me that jingled with the metallic sound of domestic authority. They were the keys to their penthouse on the Upper East Side, that marble and glass palace I had helped finance without her ever deigning to publicly acknowledge it. "I'm leaving you the apartment keys," she said with the same tone she would use to address hired help. "I need you to go every day to water the plants in the indoor garden. They are imported Singapore orchids and cost a fortune. You also have to take down the Christmas tree, remove all the decorations carefully because the ornaments are Murano glass. Each one is worth over $200. Each instruction fell on me like a slab of concrete. They weren't requests. They were military orders pronounced with the coldness of someone who had calculated exactly how much power they could exert without apparent consequences. "And don't forget to walk Napoleon twice a day," she continued, referring to their Italian greyhound, a purebred animal that ate organic dog food more expensive than my dinner. "You give him exactly 50 grams of his special food, the one marked in German, at 8 in the morning and 6 in the evening. Not a gram more, not a gram less." "But Vanessa, I don't have a car. I'll have to take the subway all the way to—" I tried to explain, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand that seemed to dismiss an annoying fly. "That's your problem, Carol. We need to be comfortable knowing our home is well cared for. Or would you prefer we hire a cleaning service and charge Michael for it?" The threat hung in the air like a bad check. She knew exactly what she meant. If I didn't accept her terms, she'd find a way to make me pay for it financially, probably by convincing Michael to reduce the monthly allowance he gave me for extraordinary expenses. Michael remained silent, checking his phone with the concentration of someone who prefers to ignore uncomfortable conversations. On the screen, I caught a glimpse of numbers, charts, notifications from banking apps that monitored his investments in real time. His capital grew while I was impoverished, paying the hidden costs of keeping them happy. And one more thing, Vanessa added, pulling a handwritten list from her Hermes handbag on paper with the letterhead of her interior design company. The neighbor on the 5th floor is doing construction, and thieves might take advantage of the noise. I need you to go in the mornings and evenings, just to verify that everything is in order. Twice a day. A 45-minute subway ride from my apartment in Astoria to 72nd Street. An hour and a half daily of public transport, paid for from my meager pension, to watch over the possessions of a woman who had never had to worry about the price of a bus token. The airport speaker announced the boarding of their flight to Malé, with that impersonal voice that characterizes international airports. First class, of course. Seats that converted into beds, Dom Perignon champagne, menus designed by Michelin star chefs. "We're leaving now," Michael said, giving me a quick kiss on the cheek that smelled of his Hugo Boss aftershave, the one I'd given him for his last birthday after saving for 3 months. "You be good, Mom. You be good." As if I were a naughty child instead of a 72-year-old woman who had sacrificed her own comfort to finance their luxuries. Vanessa didn't say goodbye. She merely looked at me over her sunglasses and said, "I expect everything to be perfect when we get back. We don't want any unpleasant surprises." I watched them walk away toward the boarding gate, their silhouettes outlined against the large airport windows where the planes waited like metallic birds ready to take people to destinations I only knew from the postcards others sent. I stood there, holding the keys that felt like shackles in my arthritic hand, watching my son and his wife disappear into the first-class line, while I mentally calculated how much the public transport would cost me to meet their demands for the next 15 days. In my coat pocket, my phone vibrated with a bank notification. An automatic transfer had deposited the dividends from my secret investments. Enough money to buy 10 trips like theirs. But they didn't know it. Not yet. The return trip from JFK gave me time to remember. Too much time. As the N train rattled through the subway tunnels beneath New York, the fluorescent lights flickering like an old movie, my mind began to unravel the threads of a story I'd been weaving for years without realizing it. 3 years ago, Michael came home with bloodshot eyes and trembling hands, confessing that his investment firm was on the verge of bankruptcy due to some risky cryptocurrency operations that had gone wrong. Bitcoin, Ethereum, names that then sounded like a foreign language but represented the difference between success and total ruin. "Mom, I've lost everything," he'd cried in my small kitchen in Astoria, the same one where I'd eaten instant soup mix for years to save every possible dollar. "The clients are going to sue me. I could go to jail. Vanessa doesn't know, but we even lost the wedding savings." I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my worn, hand-me-down recliner, calculating figures on paper napkins while drinking chamomile tea that I'd diluted with water so it would last longer. At dawn, I had made a decision that would change our lives forever. I sold the shares I had inherited from my late husband, Charles. Solid companies like AT&T, JP Morgan Chase, and Duke Energy, an estate that had been silently growing for 15 years. Conservative investment funds that generated modest but constant dividends. My only financial safety net, converted into cash to save a son who didn't even know his mother had those kinds of resources. $250,000. A fortune for someone who bought meat on sale and used discount coupons at the supermarket. Money I transferred to Michael's account with an invented excuse. An unexpected inheritance from a distant aunt who had died in Argentina. "Aunt Carol?" he'd asked, wiping away his tears. "But Mom, you never told me about her." "We were very distant." I lied with the ease only desperation and maternal love provide, but apparently she remembered she had nephews in the States. Michael had accepted the explanation without questioning much. The relief of being saved from economic ruin was too great to investigate the details of his miraculous salvation. He paid the debts, rebuilt his firm, and gradually reconstructed his reputation in the New York financial sector. but he never paid me back a cent. He never even suggested that this inheritance should be shared equally or used to improve the living conditions of the person who had made the miracle possible. 6 months later, Vanessa entered our lives like a hurricane scented with Chanel No. 5. He met her at a conference on emerging markets at the St. Regis Hotel. She ran an interior design firm that decorated the homes of new money and famous athletes. Blonde, stylish, with that calculated smile women learn in expensive private schools. The first time he introduced me to her, at 11 Madison Park, she barely spoke to me. She focused on discussing her projects, her famous clients, the trips she had taken for professional inspiration, molecular cuisine that cost $150 per person, while I pretended to understand dishes that looked like chemical experiments. "Your mother is charming," she told Michael when she thought I couldn't hear, with the same tone one uses to describe an old but harmless dog. From the beginning, she established the rules of our relationship without explicitly pronouncing them. I was the poor mother-in-law, the relic of a lower social class that had to be tolerated out of family obligation. Michael, blinded by her charms and grateful to have found someone who didn't know his near-bankruptcy past, instinctively defended her. "Vanessa comes from a very distinguished family, Mom," he explained to me one afternoon while we were having coffee at my house. "Her father has interests in luxury real estate, investments in several European countries. She's accustomed to a certain standard of living that, without her knowing it, I had helped finance indirectly by saving my son's company." The wedding was a cinematic production at the Plaza Hotel Grand Ballroom, with over 200 guests, flowers imported from Holland, Dom Perignon champagne, and a designer gown that cost more than my apartment. I arrived by subway, wearing a suit I had bought on discount at Lord & Taylor, feeling like an intruder at my own family celebration. During the ceremony, seated in the front row but invisible among so much opulence, I observed Vanessa radiating genuine happiness. It wasn't pure malice in her, but something more complex and perhaps more painful, a total inability to see beyond her own gilded reality. To her, people like me simply didn't exist on the same plane of importance. We were part of the landscape, like waiters or taxi drivers, functional when needed, invisible the rest of the time. The first years of marriage were relatively peaceful. Vanessa tolerated my presence at Sunday family dinners, although she always found subtle ways to remark on our social differences. Comments about my clothes, my Queen's accent, my table manners that evidenced my humble origins. "Carol, dear," she'd say with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "don't you think it would be better if you used a cloth napkin instead of paper when you come for dinner? It's just that we're accustomed to certain protocols." Michael never contradicted her. He had learned to navigate his new social world by assenting to his wife's opinions, adopting her class codes, gradually distancing himself from his own origins to fit the mold she had designed for him. But money remained a problem. Even though Michael's company had recovered, the expenses of maintaining Vanessa's lifestyle were astronomical. The Upper East Side penthouse, the exotic vacations, the dinners at Michelin star restaurants, the compulsive shopping at luxury boutiques. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, the requests began, always disguised as family emergencies or investment opportunities. "Mom, we need a small loan," Michael had told me a year ago, visiting my house with a dejected air. "Vanessa wants to expand her company, hire more decorators, open a branch in Miami. It's a secure investment. We'll pay you back everything with interest." $50,000 that I took from my savings account, money that had been designated for future medical expenses or possible health emergencies. I gave it to him without collateral, without contracts, only with the verbal promise of a son I blindly trusted. We never spoke of that debt again. When I tried to mention it months later, Michael changed the subject with the agility of a seasoned politician. "We'll talk about that another time, Mom. We have urgent expenses with the new house now." The new house? That penthouse they had bought in one of the most exclusive areas of Manhattan, with views of Central Park and prices exceeding $5,000 per square foot. A mortgage that, as I later discovered by chance, they had secured thanks to the collateral Michael had provided using my apartment as a guarantee without consulting me. My name appeared on documents I had never signed. My assets backed investments I had never authorized. But when I confronted Michael about this, his response was devastatingly simple. "Mom, I just wanted to make sure we could pay you back everything you've lent us. It's a guarantee for you, too. A guarantee that made me responsible for $1 million debt if they couldn't pay." The subway arrived at my station, and I climbed the escalators to the surface, where the January cold hit my face like a cold slap of reality. In my handbag, I carried the keys to their palace, the weight of 15 days of unpaid servitude, and a secret they couldn't imagine. Because what Michael and Vanessa didn't know was that during these years of loans and sacrifices, I had been quietly rebuilding my own net worth. Smart investments, stock purchases when the market was low, investment funds that had multiplied my initial capital. I had more money than they had ever spent, and I was starting to consider what to do with that information. The first day in the Upper East Side penthouse greeted me with the oppressive silence of spaces too large for one person. 2,000 square feet of travertine marble, 14-foot ceilings, windows that framed New York City as if it were an expensive postcard. Everything immaculate, everything cold, everything designed to impress more than to live. Napoleon, the Italian greyhound, observed me with that aristocratic indifference he had learned from his owners. A $5,000 animal that ate better than most retired Americans, with his organic dog food imported from Germany, and his special vitamins that cost more than my monthly arthritis medication. Vanessa's orchids stood like exotic soldiers in the indoor garden, each labeled with its scientific name and country of origin: Singapore, Thailand, Costa Rica, plants that had traveled more than I had in my entire life, transplanted into artisan ceramic pots that were worth more than my living room furniture. As I carefully watered each pot with the special meter Vanessa had left, exactly 50 milliliters per plant, Carol, not a drop more, my mind wandered to other gardens, other cares I had provided over the years. I remembered the small vegetable patch I maintained on the rooftop of our old building in Astoria when Michael was a teenager and money barely stretched to the basics. Tomatoes, lettuce, herbs that I grew in recycled pots to supplement our diet and save a few dollars weekly on groceries. Michael used to complain back then about having to eat poor people's vegetables, while his high school classmates bragged about dinners at McDonald's and pizza places. He didn't understand that every tomato I grew represented money saved for his textbooks, for his school trips, for that education he considered his birthright without knowing the real cost to me. "Why can't we eat normal food like the other families?" He'd ask me with that unintentional cruelty of teenagers, while I mentally calculated if I could afford to buy meat that week, or if we'd have to settle for lentils again. Normal. As if there were something abnormal about a widow who worked double shifts in a textile factory to support her son, who skipped meals to ensure he wasn't hungry, who mended his clothes until the patches needed patching. Now, 20 years later, I was caring for ornamental plants that didn't produce food, only social status, in an apartment that cost more than I had earned in my entire working life. The Christmas tree awaited me in the main living room like a monument to holiday consumerism. 8 feet of imported Norwegian spruce, decorated with Murano glass ornaments that Vanessa had collected during trips through Europe. Each ornament had its story, its price, its exact place in the overall arrangement. "Be careful with the red balls. They're from Venice and cost $200 each," Vanessa had insisted before leaving. "The gold ones are from Prague, the blue ones from Vienna. If you break any, you can deduct it from the money we give you for expenses." Expenses. As if the $500 a month Michael wired me was charity and not a microscopic fraction of what I had invested in his financial salvation. I began dismantling the tree with the meticulousness of a Swiss watchmaker, wrapping each ornament in tissue paper, labeling each garland, organizing each decoration into specific boxes according to the detailed instructions Vanessa had left written on 3 pages of tiny handwriting. It was a hypnotic job that allowed me to think, or perhaps, for the first time in years, truly think, instead of simply reacting to the constant demands of others. When exactly did this transformation begin? At what point did I go from being Michael's mother to being his unpaid employee? When did Vanessa stop even pretending to respect me? The answer arrived with the clarity of a slap: the day they bought this apartment. It had been 2 years ago, one October afternoon, when Michael called me, ecstatic, to announce they had found the house of their dreams. A penthouse in the heart of the Upper East Side, with a terrace, privileged views, and a price tag that exceeded $1 million. "It's a fantastic investment, Mom," he'd explained with that passion he reserved for good business deals. "Prices in this area can only go up. In 5 years, it will be worth double." 5 years. As if the future were a mathematical equation where the variables always worked in favor of those who had enough capital to bet. The mortgage was astronomical, even for someone with Michael's income. They needed collateral, a guarantee the bank would consider solid. And that's where I entered the scene, although I didn't find out until months later. Michael had used my apartment as subsidiary collateral without consulting me, forging my signature on documents I never saw. Technically, if they couldn't pay the mortgage, the bank had the legal right to foreclose on my house to cover the debt. When I discovered it, by chance reviewing some papers that arrived at my mailbox by mistake, Michael didn't deny anything. He simply explained, with that condescending patience used with small children, that it had been for my own good. "Mom, you don't understand complex finance," he'd told me, sitting on my second-hand sofa while drinking coffee from a chipped mug. "If for some reason we couldn't pay, the bank would sell your apartment, pay off our debt, and give you the rest of the money. You'd come out ahead. Ahead. As if becoming responsible for $1 million debt was a lottery instead of a legal trap. But the most painful thing wasn't the financial fraud. It was the transformation that followed. From the moment they moved into their marble palace, Vanessa began treating me not as her mother-in-law, but as trusted domestic staff, someone to whom orders could be directed without courtesy, someone whose time and energy had no monetary value, someone who existed to serve without expecting gratitude. Invitations to family dinners became work calls. "Carol, come over Sunday at 6. I need you to help me serve dinner for my Pilates friends. Carol, we have important visitors on Wednesday. Get here early to help with the cleaning." Michael had learned to look away during these interactions, suddenly busy with his phone or important papers whenever Vanessa spoke to me with that harshness he knew was wrong, but didn't have the courage to confront. The last Mother's Day had been especially humiliating. Vanessa organized a lunch in my honor in their main dining room, inviting her friends to meet Michael's mother. But throughout the gathering, I served the food, cleared the dishes, washed the glasses, while they discussed their upcoming vacations in the Hamptons and their facial rejuvenation surgeries. "Carol is a treasure," Vanessa had told one of her friends, "a woman with more surgeries than years. Always willing to help, never complains, very discreet. It's hard to find staff that reliable these days." Staff. On my own Mother's Day, I had been reduced to domestic personnel who were lucky enough to share a last name with the man of the house. And Michael, my son, the baby I had carried in my arms during his nights of fever, who had learned to walk by grabbing my skirts, who had cried in my lap when other children mocked his cheap shoes. Michael had smiled and nodded when his wife described me as an employee. I finished packing the last box of Christmas ornaments as the sun began to set over New York, staining the penthouse windows orange. The city stretched out at my feet like a map of other people's lives, millions of people having dinner in their homes, arguing about their problems, planning their futures. In my handbag, my phone vibrated with another bank notification. The interest from my investments in European funds had generated automatic dividends worth $3,000. Money that appeared effortlessly, silently multiplying while I pretended to be poor so as not to disrupt the balance of power my family had built at my expense. Napoleon followed me to the door with those sad eyes of an animal that knows more than it can express. I gently stroked his head, feeling the silky texture of his $5,000 fur. "You're a possession too, aren't you?" I whispered to him. "But at least they acknowledge your value." I closed the penthouse door and walked toward the elevator, carrying the keys to a kingdom where I was invisible and the increasingly clear memory of who I had been before becoming a shadow. I would return tomorrow, and the day after, and every day for 2 more weeks. But something had changed inside me during those hours of silence and reflection, something Vanessa and Michael hadn't calculated when they turned me into their unpaid maid. I had started to remember my own power. The 7th day of my voluntary servitude began with a call from Vanessa in the Maldives. Her voice arrived distorted by the international connection, mixed with the background sound of the Indian Ocean waves and the laughter of other multi-millionaire guests who populated the luxury resort where they were staying. "Carol, I have to tell you something fantastic." Her tone was that of someone sharing a personal triumph. "We met a wonderful couple here at the hotel. He's a real estate mogul, has properties all over Europe, and she runs a charitable foundation that helps needy families." Needy families. The irony hit me like a slap while I was sitting in my Astoria kitchen, having toast with margarine because real butter was outside my feigned monthly budget. "They've invited us to dinner at their private villa tonight," Vanessa continued, without asking how I was, if I needed anything, if the plants were still alive. "It's an incredible opportunity to make important contacts. Michael is thrilled." Michael, my son, who once told me I was the most important person in his life, was now thrilled to meet rich strangers while he had me house-sitting as if I were hired staff. "By the way," Vanessa added with that naturalness she used to camouflage her orders, "I need you to go to the apartment twice today, this morning and tonight. The concierge told me there are plumbing issues in the building, and I want to make sure we don't have any flooding." Twice. On a day when the New York subway was on a partial strike, and I would have to take 3 different buses to get from my neighborhood to the Upper East Side. 4 trips in total, each an hour and a half long, paid for from my widow's pension that barely covered my basic expenses. "Wouldn't it be better if you called the concierge directly?" I suggested carefully, knowing that any resistance would be interpreted as laziness or disinterest. "He can check the apartment and—" "Carol, please," she interrupted me with that exasperated sigh she reserved for conversations with uncooperative subordinates. "I don't trust the concierge for something that important. Also, take the opportunity to clean the main bathroom a little more. I noticed the mirror had some smudges when I left." The main bathroom mirror was a piece of beveled glass that covered the entire wall, installed by Italian designers who charged more per hour than I received in a month. I had cleaned it 3 times the previous week, but apparently my cleaning standards did not reach the levels of perfection Vanessa considered acceptable. "And another thing," she added, her voice now competing with background music that sounded like a chamber orchestra playing for guests at the infinity pool. "Michael wants you to take some photos of the apartment. Professional photos, well-framed. He's thinking of selling it, and we need material for the real estate agent." Selling it. The word cut through me like a frozen dagger. The apartment they had bought using my house as collateral, which had been partially paid for with dividends from my secret investments channeled through the family loans, was now going to be sold without anyone considering consulting me or including me in the profits. "Selling it?" I managed to articulate. "But you just bought it 2 years ago." "The prices have gone up a lot," Vanessa explained with the excitement of someone who has discovered gold in their backyard. "We could make almost $300,000 in capital gains. With that money, Michael wants to invest in a new business proposed to him here in the Maldives, a chain of luxury eco-resorts. $300,000. A fortune that would become capital for new business ventures, while I continued to pretend that $500 a month was significant aid for my survival. "So I need those photos today," she continued. "Good lighting, all the angles. And Carol, make sure you don't appear in any of them. Potential buyers don't need to see, well, you understand." I understood perfectly. They didn't want future multi-million-dollar owners to see an older working-class woman contaminating the aspirational image of their luxury property. I hung up the phone with trembling hands and looked at my reflection in the kitchen window. A 72-year-old woman with wrinkles that told stories of economic worries, gray hairs that I couldn't afford to dye at expensive salons, functional clothes bought on sale that lasted for years because I had no alternative. When had I become invisible to my own son? I made the first trip of the day to the apartment in silence, watching New York from the bus windows as if I were a tourist in my own city. Elderly people like me occupied the reserved seats, many with that lost look of someone who has plenty of time but no specific place to go. In the Upper East Side, the streets were populated by elegant women strolling with Loewe and Hermès bags, Older women having lunch on expensive terraces and talking about their Latina maids in terms that oscillated between paternalism and benevolent contempt. Mine is from Ecuador, very hardworking, but you have to explain everything twice, I heard a lady with authentic pearls say while I waited for the bus back. Although at least she's honest, unlike the last one who took my diamond brooch. I wondered if Vanessa would ever speak of me in those terms. If she would reduce our years of family relationship to anecdotes about my domestic efficiency or my limitations in social understanding. The second visit of the day coincided with the sunset, when the apartment lights turned on automatically according to the smart home system Michael had installed to impress visitors. Every switch was a small touch screen. Every appliance responded to voice commands in 3 different languages. While taking photos with my basic phone, a 5-year-old model doing its best with the professional lighting Vanessa demanded, I thought of all the times I had photographed important moments in Michael's life. His first steps, staggering between my outstretched arms in our small rental apartment. His high school graduation, proud with a scholarship I had secured by working double shifts for months. His first communion, dressed in a suit that had cost 3 weeks of my salary but had been worth it for the smile of happiness on his face. Now he was asking me to photograph his wealth to sell it to strangers, making sure I didn't appear in the frame so as not to depreciate the market value of his success. On the penthouse terrace, as I adjusted the angle to capture the panoramic views of Central Park that so impressed potential buyers, I found something that chilled my blood. A folder forgotten on the wrought iron table, partially scattered by the wind. Contracts, budgets, business plans for the Maldives resort Vanessa had mentioned. I browsed by instinct, and what I saw took my breath away. The project required an initial investment of $500,000. Local partners would provide the land and permits, but Michael needed to demonstrate financial solvency to enter as a principal investor. And there, on one of the financial projections pages, I saw my name. Available assets: maternal inherited apartment, estimated value $180,000, family emergency funds, estimated $75,000, LIQUIDITYFROMCURRENTREALESTATESALE, $75,000. Liquidity from current real estate sale, $300,000. My apartment, my house, the place where I had lived for 30 years, where I had raised Michael, where I kept the memories of my late husband, and the few objects of sentimental value I owned. Michael had calculated my home as an available asset for his international business ventures, not as an emergency guarantee, not as family backup, as liquid capital that he could convert to cash when necessary to finance his ambitions. The pain I felt at that moment was different from everything before. It wasn't the humiliation of being treated as an employee, nor the frustration of being ignored as a person. It was the devastating realization that for my son, I had stopped being his mother and become a financial resource to be exploited when circumstances required it. I put the documents back exactly as I had found them, took the last photos Vanessa had requested, and left the apartment carrying a certainty that would change everything. My own son was planning to take away the last thing I had left. On the subway ride back home, as the tunnel lights created hypnotic patterns on the windows, I took out my phone and opened my private bank application. The account Michael and Vanessa didn't know existed showed a balance that would have impressed even their multi-millionaire friends from the Maldives. It was time for them to meet the real Carol Davies. Not the poor mother-in-law they tolerated out of obligation, but the woman who had been secretly financing their lifestyle while they publicly humiliated her. Tomorrow, my own strategy would begin, and this time, I would set the rules of the game. The 10th day of my servitude began like all the others, waking up at 6 in the morning to get to the apartment before 8, when Napoleon expected his German dog food breakfast, and the orchids needed their exact dose of filtered water. But for the first time in a week, I didn't feel like a prisoner serving a sentence. I had made a decision. During the bus ride, I looked at my reflection in the window and saw something different. The same gray hairs, the same worried wrinkles, the same modest clothes bought on sale. But my eyes had changed. Where there was resignation before, now there was determination. Where there was sadness, now there was a cold, calculated fury. In my handbag, I carried something that would change everything. A confirmed appointment for that afternoon at the offices of Sterling and Associates, the most prestigious law firm in New York, specializing in banking law and financial fraud. The consultation had cost me $200, paid from my secret account, but it was an investment in my freedom. I also carried photocopies of all the documents I had found the day before, organized chronologically to tell the complete story of how my son had used my assets as collateral without my consent. Every piece of paper was a piece of evidence, every forged signature proof of the systematic betrayal I had suffered for years. Arriving at the penthouse, Napoleon greeted me with his usual aristocratic indifference, but this time it didn't bother me. I even spoke to him while preparing his breakfast. "You know what, Napoleon?" I said, measuring exactly 50 grams of organic dog food. "Your owners think they have me controlled just like they have you, but there's an important difference between us." The greyhound looked at me with those sad eyes that seemed to understand more than he could express. "You are worth $5,000 and depend completely on them to survive. I am worth much more than they imagine, and I'm starting to remember my own power." While watering the exotic orchids, my phone rang. It was Vanessa, calling from some floating restaurant where the background noise suggested live music and conversations in several languages. "Carol, I have wonderful news." Her voice distilled that excitement that only easy money produced. "Michael has closed the deal for the resort. We're going to be partners in a chain of luxury hotels in the Indian Ocean. Isn't that fantastic?" Fantastic. A word that had lost all meaning after a week of hearing her use it to describe every new luxury they afforded with capital that in large part came from my sacrificed assets. "That means we'll need immediate liquidity," she continued without waiting for my response. "So we're going to accelerate the sale of the apartment. Michael has already contacted 3 different real estate agencies to get the best price. My apartment, not theirs, but my house, my home, my only refuge in the world." But Vanessa mentioned it as if it were just another property in their investment portfolio. "We'll also need you to sign some papers when we get back," she added with that naturalness she used to disguise the stabs. "They are legal formalities for the new business. Michael will explain all the details to you. Legal formalities. As if transferring the ownership of my house were a routine administrative process, something I should do without question because my son had decided it was convenient for his business plans." "Vanessa," I said, surprised by the calm in my own voice, "I need to ask you something." "Sure, Carol, but make it quick. We have a helicopter excursion in 20 minutes. Have you ever thought of me as a person? As someone with feelings, needs, rights? Or have I always just been a free employee and a source of funding for your whims?" The silence that followed lasted so long that I thought the call had been cut off. When Vanessa spoke again, her tone had changed completely. "I don't know what you're talking about, Carol. I think you're confused. Michael and I have always treated you like family. Family." The word sounded strange coming from someone who had treated me like domestic staff for years. "Family?" I repeated. "Do families order each other around like employees? Do families forge signatures to use others' houses as collateral? Do families plan to sell someone's home without consulting them?" Another silence. Then, Vanessa spoke with a harshness she no longer bothered to hide. "Look, Carol, I don't know what ideas you're putting in your head, but you'd better forget them. Michael is your son, and he has the right to make decisions about the family assets. You should be grateful that he's taking care of everything instead of complaining like what, Vanessa? Say it. Like a bothersome old woman who doesn't know her place, right? Carol, I think you need to rest. When we get back, we'll talk calmly. But you'd better be clear about your position in this family. My position." As if I were a domestic employee receiving a reprimand from Human Resources, I hung up the phone without saying goodbye and looked at the orchids I had just watered. Exotic plants ripped from their natural habitat, transplanted into an artificial environment where they depended completely on others to survive, like I had been for the last few years. But the orchids couldn't choose. I could. At 4 in the afternoon, I was sitting in the elegant offices of Sterling and Associates, facing a mahogany desk that probably cost more than all my furniture combined. The lawyer, Mr. Sterling, was a man in his 50s with the distinguished air of someone who had spent decades resolving complex financial problems for wealthy clients. "Ms. Davies, he said after reviewing all the documents I had brought. What you are telling me constitutes document fraud, misappropriation, and possibly aggravated financial fraud. These are serious felonies that could carry prison sentences for your son. Prison. The word hit me like a cold slap. It was one thing to want justice, another to completely destroy Michael's life. I don't want him to go to jail, I said quickly. I just want to regain control of my assets and get back what they've taken from me. Mr. Sterling nodded with the understanding of someone who had navigated similar cases for decades. I understand perfectly, Ms. Davies. We can resolve this in two ways. Through the criminal route, which would be long and painful for everyone, or through the civil route, where we negotiate fair compensation without ruining anyone. What kind of compensation? Well, he said, consulting some notes he had taken while we spoke, considering you provided the capital that saved your son's company, that you have been indirectly funding their lifestyle, and that they used your property as collateral without authorization, I would calculate a minimum compensation of $500,000. $500,000. An amount that represented justice, but also vengeance. However, the lawyer continued, before proceeding legally, I recommend you attempt a direct negotiation. Sometimes, when people face the real consequences of their actions, they prefer to reach an amicable agreement. And if they refuse to negotiate? Mr. Sterling smiled with the confidence of someone who had won more difficult cases. Ms. Davies, with the documentation you have, and considering I can demonstrate that they have been living off assets that legally belong to you, they will initially refuse, but they will change their minds when they understand the magnitude of their legal problems. I left the office with a clear plan and a feeling of power I hadn't experienced in years. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was in control of the situation. On the way back to the apartment for the evening visit Vanessa had ordered, I thought of Michael, not the man who had forged my signature and planned to sell my house, but the boy he had been, the son who had drawn me Mother's Day cards, who had brought me wildflowers from the park, who had promised to take care of me when he grew up. At what moment had I lost that boy? When had filial love been replaced by financial calculations? But it no longer mattered. That boy had grown up and become a man who saw me as an exploitable resource, and I had made the decision to defend the little I had left. Entering the penthouse for the last time as their unpaid employee, I looked around with different eyes. I no longer saw a palace where I didn't belong, but a property bought with my money, decorated with objects paid for with my assets, maintained with my free labor. Tomorrow, when Michael and Vanessa returned from their extended honeymoon, they were going to discover that the submissive old woman they had taken for granted no longer existed. In her place, they would find a woman who had learned to value herself and who was prepared to fight for what legally belonged to her. The real Carol Davies was about to return, and this time, she wouldn't ask permission to exist. The JFK airport had never seemed so small to me as that Sunday afternoon, when I waited in the international arrivals area watching Michael and Vanessa emerge from the gate with that golden tan only achieved at five-star resorts and that relaxed smile of someone who has spent 15 days without financial worries. Vanessa wore a white linen dress that she had probably bought at some Malay boutique, complemented by Italian leather sandals and a new handbag that I recognized as a limited edition Bottega Veneta. Michael wore a navy silk shirt that gave him that air of a successful international businessman, the look of someone who had closed multi-million-dollar deals, while others took care of the mundane details of his domestic life. They saw me and approached with that naturalness of those who expect to be received with gratitude and submission. Vanessa kissed me on both cheeks, with the formality of a diplomat greeting a minor dignitary, while Michael gave me a quick hug that smelled of expensive perfume and brand-name sunscreen. "Mom, you look great," Michael said, although his attention was already on his phone, checking the messages accumulated during the flight hours. I hope everything went well at the apartment. "Everything went perfectly well," I replied, measuring every word with the precision of someone who has mentally rehearsed a conversation for days. "The plants are immaculate, Napoleon is happy, and the apartment is ready for potential buyers' visits." "Excellent," Vanessa smiled with the satisfaction of someone receiving a well-executed service. "I knew we could trust you." Tomorrow morning, the Sotheby's International Realty Appraiser is coming to do the final valuation. Sotheby's, the most exclusive real estate agency in New York, specializing in luxury properties for international clients. The type of company that sold apartments like works of art to Russian oligarchs and Arab sheikhs. During the taxi ride toward Midtown Manhattan, Michael enthusiastically told me the details of his new business venture, the resort in the Maldives, the partnership with local entrepreneurs, the profitability projections that promise to double the investment in less than 3 years. It's a unique opportunity, Mom, he explained with that passion he reserved for promising businesses. Luxury tourism in the Indian Ocean is growing 30% annually. Clients pay up to $1,000 a night just for the experience of sleeping over the water. $1,000 a night? What I spent on food for 2 entire months, converted into the price of a single night's accommodation for multi-millionaire tourists. That sounds very exciting, I said, maintaining a neutral tone. I suppose the initial investment is considerable. $500,000, Michael confirmed without hesitation. But with the sale of the apartment and some adjustments to our family assets, we'll have more than enough liquidity. Family assets. The expression sounded strangely familiar, and I remembered seeing it in the documents I had found on the penthouse terrace. My house, my assets, my savings, all categorized as family assets, available for my son's business ambitions. What kind of adjustments? I asked with feigned curiosity. Vanessa turned from the front seat of the taxi with a smile that was meant to be reassuring but seemed to me like the grimace of a predator preparing to devour its prey. Nothing for you to worry about, Carol. Just some asset reorganizations that Michael will explain to you calmly tomorrow. The important thing is that the whole family is going to benefit from this new business. Family. That word again, used to disguise the systematic plundering of my personal assets. The taxi dropped us off at the penthouse door, where Napoleon greeted us with that controlled joy of well-behaved animals. Vanessa inspected the apartment with the meticulousness of a military inspector, checking every surface, every plant, every detail of the decor to ensure everything was exactly as she had left it. Perfect, she announced after completing her inspection. I knew we could trust you, Carol. Tomorrow, when the appraiser comes, everything will be impeccable to get the best possible price. Speaking of prices, Michael said, settling onto the Italian leather sofa with the naturalness of someone who has returned home after a well-deserved vacation, we need to discuss some important issues. There it was, the moment I had been waiting for all those days. Michael pulled a folder from his briefcase, full of official documents, papers with notary seals and bank logos that I immediately recognized. Everything was prepared, organized, ready for my automatic and submissive signature. Mom, as Vanessa mentioned, we need to make some changes to the family asset structure. He began with that professional tone he used when explaining complex financial concepts to potential clients. These are tax optimizations that will benefit all of us. Tax optimizations. An elegant way of describing the legal theft of my inheritance. The apartment where you live, Michael continued, avoiding my gaze as he arranged the papers, is technically mortgaged as collateral for this property. To release that guarantee and give you more security, we've decided to transfer the title directly to my name. Transfer the title. My house, the home where I had lived for 30 years, where I had raised Michael, where I kept the memories of my late husband, reduced to a transfer of title that Michael presented as a favor to me. In exchange, Vanessa added with that smile she had perfected over years of negotiating with wealthy clients, we guarantee you a right of lifelong use. You can live there until you no longer need it. Until you no longer need it. A delicate way of saying, until you die. Additionally, Michael extended a golden pen toward me that shone under the halogen lights of the living room. We've managed to get the bank to approve an additional line of credit using your apartment as expanded collateral. That will give us immediate liquidity for the Maldives project. A line of credit. My house converted into the backing for international business ventures that I had never authorized. I took the pen between my fingers, feeling its weight, its coldness. Michael and Vanessa watched me with the patient expectation of those accustomed to their orders being carried out without resistance. You know what, Michael? I said. placing the pen on the glass table where it clinked with a metallic sound. I think before I sign anything, you should know something important. Vanessa's smile froze slightly. Michael frowned with that expression of confusion he adopted when something didn't follow the planned script. What do you mean, Mom? I mean that I've spent these 15 days thinking about our relationship, about how you treat me, about what you expect from me. I got up from the sofa and walked toward the window overlooking the terrace, from where you could see the entire New York skyline stretching out under the sunset lights. The city where I had worked for decades, where I had saved every cent, where I had built up assets that my own family now wanted to expropriate. I've also been thinking about your father, I continued without turning toward them, about what he would have said if he saw how you've been treating me these last few years. Mom, I don't understand what you're getting at. Michael had stood up, his voice showing the first signs of irritation. These are just routine papers, legal formalities that benefit all of us. All of us? I turned to face them directly. Or just you two? Vanessa had also stood up, her heels tapping nervously against the marble floor. Carol, I think you're making a mountain out of a molehill. Michael is trying to protect you, secure your future, my future. I interrupted her with a calm that surprised even me. Let's talk about my future, Vanessa. In your future plans, am I still the free domestic employee? The elderly woman who waters your plants and cleans your house without even receiving a thank you? The silence that followed was so dense you could cut it with a knife. Michael and Vanessa exchanged glances with that silent communication of couples who have been caught in a lie and don't know how to proceed. Or maybe, I continued, enjoying having their complete attention for the first time in years, in your plans, I'm just a convenient source of funding? Someone whose assets you can use when you need liquidity for your business ventures? Mom, I think you're being unfair. Michael tried to regain control of the conversation. Everything we've done has been for the good of the family. For the good of the family? My voice rose in volume for the first time. Was forging my signature for the good of the family? Was using my house as collateral without consulting me for the good of the family? Is planning to sell my home without my consent for the good of the family? Michael's eyes widened as he realized I knew much more than he had assumed. Vanessa visibly paled beneath her tropical resort tan. I think the time has come, I said, pulling a carefully prepared folder from my handbag, for you to meet the real Carol Davies. I opened the folder on the glass table, revealing bank documents, investment statements, certificates of deposit that showed figures neither of them had ever imagined. Michael leaned in to read, and I watched his face go from confusion to astonishment, and finally to horror as he grasped the magnitude of what was before him. It's not possible, Vanessa murmured, reading over her husband's shoulder. These numbers can't be real. They are very real, I confirmed with a smile that felt genuine for the first time in years. And now that you know the truth, we can start negotiating as equals. The power had changed hands, and for the first time in a long time, I had absolute control of the situation. The numbers danced before Michael's eyes like impossible to decipher hieroglyphics. $2,400,000 in diversified mutual funds, $500,000 in blue-chip stocks, $300,000 in certificates of deposit, CDs, another $200,000 in cryptocurrencies that I had bought when they were still worth pennies. Vanessa had sunk onto the Italian leather sofa, her trembling hands trying to process a reality that shattered all her mental frameworks. The elderly woman she had treated as domestic staff for years, the poor mother-in-law she had publicly humiliated, the old woman whose time and dignity she had considered free resources, had more liquid assets than everything they had accumulated in their married life. I don't understand, Michael stammered, reviewing document after document with the desperation of someone looking for a logical explanation for the impossible. Where did you get all this money, Mom? Where? I sat across from them with the calmness of someone who can finally speak without fear. From working 60 hours a week for 30 years while you were growing up. From saving every cent I didn't spend on your education, your clothes, your books, your school trips. From intelligently investing your father's pension money instead of spending it on luxuries. Michael flipped through several pages of bank statements, his face progressively paling. But Mom, we thought that... You thought what, Michael? That I was a useless old woman whose only value was looking after your plants and cleaning your house? That you could use my assets as collateral for your ventures without consulting me because I was too dumb to understand finance? Vanessa had found her voice, though it sounded strangled by the shock. Carol, if you had all this money, why did you live like a pauper? I completed the sentence she didn't dare finish. Because I wanted to know who loved me for who I was, not for what I could give them. I wanted to see if my own son would respect me as a person, or if he would only value me as a source of funding. I got up and walked toward the window, watching the lights of New York gradually turn on at sunset. Every point of light represented a life, a family, people who perhaps were also being exploited by those who supposedly loved them. During these years, I continued without turning toward them, I have been secretly funding your lifestyle. Do you think Michael's company was saved by a mysterious inheritance from an Argentinian aunt? That money came from my investments. Do you think the bank approved the mortgage on this apartment solely on your merits? I backed that operation with real guarantees that you were unaware of. Michael was speechless, holding a statement that showed a transfer of $250,000 made exactly 3 years ago. The same day he had come crying to my kitchen, confessing his impending bankruptcy. Even the $50,000 Vanessa needed to expand her design firm, I added, enjoying the absolute silence that had fallen over the room, came from my personal account. Money you've never paid back, by the way. Vanessa tried to speak but only managed to emit incoherent sounds. Her world of certainties was collapsing like a house of cards in a storm. Do you know how much I've spent on you two over these years? I took a tablet from my handbag where I had prepared a detailed presentation, $700,000 in total. Money I gave voluntarily, without contracts, without guarantees, because I believed that's what mothers who loved their children did. The figures appeared on the screen with the precision of a forensic audit. Every transfer, every loan, every family aid documented with exact dates, concepts, and amounts. $700,000, which is equivalent to your entire current net worth, I continued. Money that allowed you to live like multi-millionaires while you treated me like your maid. Michael had gotten up and was pacing nervously around the living room, running his hands through his hair with the erratic gesticulation of someone confronting a reality he couldn't process. Mom, we didn't know. If you had told us the truth from the beginning. The truth? My voice acquired an edge that even surprised me. What truth, Michael? That I had money? And would that have changed anything? Would you have treated me with respect just because I was rich? No, that's not what I mean. It's exactly what you mean, I interrupted him. Because during these years when you thought I was poor, you turned me into your free employee. You humiliated me in front of your friends. You forged my signature to use my house as collateral. You planned to expropriate my home to fund your businesses. Vanessa had partially regained her composure and tried to reconstruct her defensive position. Carol, I think you're exaggerating. We always treated you like family. Like family? I took out my phone and searched for the recordings I had been secretly making over the last few weeks. Do you want me to play the phone conversations where you ordered me around like domestic staff? Or would you prefer me to read the messages where you threatened to reduce my financial aid if I didn't obey your whims? Vanessa's face turned into a mask of panic. She hadn't expected someone like me to have the foresight to document their abuses. I also have the photographs, I continued, flipping through the images on my phone, that you asked me to take of the apartment to sell it, with specific instructions that I shouldn't appear in any of them so as not to depreciate the property's value. Michael had sat down again, slumped on the sofa as if the weight of reality were physically crushing him. What do you want from us, Mom? He asked, with a voice that sounded defeated. What did you hope to achieve with all this? What I want is very simple, I replied, putting away all the documents and sitting back down across from them with the calmness of someone who holds all the winning cards. I want you to pay back the $700,000 that I have lent you over these years. With the corresponding interest, we're talking about approximately $900,000. $900,000! Vanessa had jumped up as if pricked with a needle. But that's more money than we have in total. Exactly. I confirmed with a smile that was anything but maternal. It's more money than you have, which means you'll have to sell this apartment, liquidate your investments, and probably take out additional loans to settle your debt with me. Michael looked at me with an expression that mixed horror and admiration. And if we refuse? If you refuse? I stood up and gathered my documents with the efficiency of an executive closing a business meeting. My lawyer has instructions to file a lawsuit for document fraud, misappropriation, and aggravated financial fraud. These are felonies that carry prison sentences of up to 8 years. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Napoleon, who had been observing the conversation from his designer bed, seemed to have caught the tension and remained motionless. Furthermore, I added, heading toward the entrance door, I have complete documentation of how you have been using my assets as bank collateral without my consent. The bank would have to review all your credit operations, which could result in the immediate cancellation of your lines of credit. Vanessa had started crying, but they weren't tears of remorse, but of financial panic. Carol, please, there has to be some way to resolve this without completely ruining us. There is, I confirmed, stopping at the threshold. You have 48 hours to decide. Either you voluntarily pay me what you owe me, or we resolve this in court. And after? Michael asked with a broken voice. If we pay you, what happens to our relationship? I turned to look at him one last time, and in his eyes, I finally saw something I hadn't seen in years. Real, unfeigned respect. After that, I said with a composure that surprised me, we can start building a relationship based on mutual respect instead of unilateral exploitation. I left the apartment, closing the door softly, taking with me the keys that Vanessa had handed me as symbols of servitude, and that I now returned as a declaration of independence. For the first time in years, I felt completely free, and for the first time in decades, my son was going to have to face the real consequences of his actions. The elevator descended slowly to the ground floor, and with every floor it dropped, I felt myself definitively moving away from the submissive woman I had been, and closer to the strong person I had always carried inside. The real Carol Davies had returned, and this time, she had come to stay. 6 months later, New York greeted me in a completely different way. I was no longer the invisible woman traveling by subway, counting pennies to make ends meet, but someone walking through the streets of the Upper East Side with the tranquility of someone who has learned to value herself. I hadn't changed neighborhoods. I still lived in my Astoria apartment, but I had changed everything else. The morning began as all mornings had for months. Having breakfast on the terrace I had refinished, reading the Wall Street Journal while Coco, my new Persian cat, curled up on my lap. She was an animal I had adopted from the municipal shelter, an older creature no one wanted, but who turned out to be the perfect companion for a woman who had learned that value is not measured in pedigree, but in the capacity to give sincere love. The doorbell rang exactly at 10, as we had agreed. It was Michael, who came for our monthly appointment with that nervous punctuality of someone who knows he can no longer afford to be late for any commitment with me. I received him in the living room I had completely redecorated. New but comfortable furniture, paintings I had chosen for personal taste and not to impress anyone, plants I cared for because they brought me joy and not because someone ordered me to. The contrast with the oppressive atmosphere of the Upper East Side penthouse was absolute. "Hi, Mom?" He greeted me with that new respect he had learned over the last few months. I brought this month's check. Michael handed me an envelope with the transfer corresponding to his payment plan. $900,000 divided into 60 monthly installments of $15,000 each. A schedule he himself had proposed when he realized the alternative was complete financial ruin and possible jail time. "Thank you," I said, putting the envelope away without opening it. "How are things going?" "Better than I expected," he admitted, sitting on the sofa with that humility he hadn't known before. "We had to sell the apartment, obviously, and liquidate most of the investments. But we found a smaller co-op in the East Village that we really like. The East Village, a neighborhood that, like my old one, had history and grit, a respectable but less ostentatious choice that signaled a real shift." "And Vanessa?" I asked, with real curiosity, not malice. Michael sighed in a way that seemed to release years of accumulated tension. "Vanessa has had to make a lot of adjustments. She lost some clients when news of our financial problems got out, She now works from home, smaller projects, but she says she's actually happier this way. Really? I think so. You know, Mom, these months have been tough, but also revealing. When you don't have the money to keep up appearances, you discover who you really are and who your real friends are. I got up to prepare coffee, that domestic routine I used to do out of obligation and now enjoyed as a small ritual of normalcy. Did you hear anything about the Maldives project? I asked from the kitchen. It was canceled, Michael replied with a laugh that sounded more relieved than bitter. The local partners turned out to be con artists. They would have run off with our money in less than 6 months. In retrospect, I think you saved me from a much greater loss. I returned with 2 cups of coffee and sat across from him, observing how he had physically changed over these months. He was still my son, but he had lost that arrogance that had characterized him during his years of financial success. In its place was a serenity I hadn't seen since he was a teenager. Michael, I said, after a long silence, I want you to know that I didn't do all this for revenge. I know, Mom. I understand that now. I did it because I had lost my son somewhere along the way. I had gained a stranger who saw me as a resource instead of a person. Michael lowered his gaze, and I could see those words still hurt him, but it was a necessary pain, the kind of pain that produces growth instead of resentment. Can I ask you something? He finally said. Of course. Why did you never tell me you had so much money? If I had known from the beginning, what would you have done differently? I interrupted him gently. Would you have respected me more? Would you have treated me better? Or would you have simply found more sophisticated ways to take advantage of me? Michael thought for a long time before answering. Probably the latter, he admitted with a surprising honesty. And that's the most painful part of all this. That you had to pretend to be poor to discover that your own son didn't value you as a person. But now you do, I observed. And that's the only thing that truly matters. Do you think we can rebuild our relationship? He asked with a vulnerability he hadn't shown since childhood. I think we already are rebuilding it, I replied. These monthly conversations, this new honesty between us, it's more than we've had in years. Michael nodded and drank his coffee in silence. Outside, New York buzzed with its usual activity, but inside my renovated apartment, there was a peace I hadn't experienced in decades. And what are you going to do with all that money? He finally asked. Now that you don't have to pretend to be poor. I smiled and showed him some brochures I had on the table. I'm going to travel. All those places I saw on postcards when I worked to pay for your education. Paris, Rome, Vienna. I want to see the world before it's too late. That sounds perfect, Michael said. And for the first time in years, his smile seemed genuine. I'm also going to start a foundation, I continued, for older women who have been financially exploited by their families. There are more cases like mine than people imagine. Really? Yes. It turns out that when you start talking openly about these things, many women my age have similar stories. Sons who see them as personal banks, daughters-in-law who treat them like employees, families who confuse love with servitude. Michael looked thoughtful. Can I help? He finally asked. Not with money, obviously, but maybe with legal or financial advice. Pro bono, of course. The offer moved me more than I expected. I'd love that, son. But only if you do it because you genuinely want to help. Not out of guilt or obligation. I would do it because it's the right thing to do, he replied. And because maybe that way I can make up for some of the damage I caused you. When Michael left that afternoon, I stayed on the terrace watching the sunset over New York. Coco had settled into my lap, purring with that simple satisfaction of animals that know they are where they should be. My phone vibrated with a WhatsApp message. It was from Vanessa. Carol, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I wanted to tell you that these months have taught me a lot about myself and how badly I treated you. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I am truly sorry. Michael is happier now, more like the man I fell in love with. Thank you for giving me my husband back. The message surprised me. I hadn't expected an apology from Vanessa, much less one that sounded so sincere. I replied, Forgiveness is not something you ask for, Vanessa. It is something you earn day by treating people better. But I appreciate your message. That night, As I had a quiet dinner in my renovated kitchen, I thought about the entire journey, from the invisible woman who cared for other people's plants to the empowered person who was now planning international trips and charitable foundations. It hadn't just been a matter of money. Money had been the tool, but the real change had been internal. I had learned to value myself, to defend myself, to establish boundaries that I didn't know I had the right to draw before. My story wasn't unique. All over New York, all over the country, there were women like me who had sacrificed so much for their families that they had lost sight of their own worth. Women who had confused love with total self-renunciation, who had believed that being good mothers meant being invisible as people. But there was also hope, because if I had been able to regain my power at 72, any woman could do it at any age. The next day, I would start planning my first trip, Paris in the spring, as I had dreamed for decades. This time I wouldn't travel in my imagination, but in first class, because I had learned that I deserved the best life had to offer. And most importantly of all, I would travel alone, by my own choice, not out of abandonment. Because I had discovered that the best company I could have was that of a woman who finally respected herself. Have you ever felt that your family took you for granted? Do you know anyone who has gone through something similar? Tell me in the comments if this story reminded you of a situation you have lived or witnessed. If you liked this video, give it a like and subscribe to the channel so that this message reaches someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes, the most powerful stories are the ones that help us recognize our own value.